Serious hikers, campers, woodsmen and the like, what are your scariest experiences in them there woods? My buddies and I were camping in the woods in Yosemite, CA. We were the only ones in the area, and we knew this because of the camping registry. We were quite literally the only ones in a 20-mile radius. Anyways, everything was great and normal, and our campsite was on the side of a lake. At night, we all shared an 8-man tent. It was cozy with 8 guys in a tent, but not horrible. Anyways, at about 3 a.m. the first night, we were all suddenly awoken by one member of our group standing up in the tent and frantically opening the tent door. He poked his head out and began super frantically and nervously saying, "There's someone in our camp." He kept repeating it, and sounded absolutely terrified. Needless to say, we were fucking horrified that someone might be in our camp, because we knew that we were supposed to be alone. Everyone who had just been woken up was looking at each other with mortified looks on our faces. After about 15 seconds of saying that someone was in our camp, he laid back down like nothing had happened, and slept. The motherfucker was sleepwalking, and there was no one in the camp. It was hard to fall back asleep. Went turkey hunting with my dad in the Shawnee National Forest several years ago. I was about 10. Took one afternoon to hike and scout hunting spots. Along the trail we saw a few blood splatters and drips, but not big deal. It's nature. About 1/4 mile up the trail, however, we come up to 3 dogs hanging from a tree, gutted, bled out, and skinned. Okay, now that was pretty weird and scary. We kept going a bit further as there was a bluff not too far up the way that was pretty cool to look at. Come to the bluff, find weird symbols burned into the ground and on the sides of the rock wall. Candle wax absolutely everywhere and more blood all over the ground. By that time my dad, whom I've never seen scared in my life, looked at me and said, "Let's go," and we took it at a pretty quick pace back to the camp. The worst part is that we didn't leave the campsite, so that night I laid awake in the camper freaking out at every sound I heard. Still get goosebumps thinking about that event to this day. Bedded down for the night on my tarp. A few minutes later heard some rustling coming from my immediate left. Turned on my flashlight to see a bear's ass literally 2 feet from my nose, using one of its front paws and face to rifle through my pack. I'd like to say I let out a manly war cry to scare it away, brown bear, but it came out more of a h-ho-oh-oh-oh. Bear scampers forward, trips on the pack, face plants into a fallen log, looks back at me like it's my fault, then runs off. Then another time, an elk stepped on me while I was asleep, hurt like a mother, fortunately didn't pierce my wrap canvas. I yelled in pain. Elk gave one of those whistle bugle cries and stomped off. That was scarier than the bear. If it had stomped on me I'd have a minimum of a few broken ribs. At night at my fire, getting ready to cook up some food, this damn coyote, I think, was kinda dark, sneaks up, grabs my food bag and just runs off with it. I didn't see it until he had the satchel in his mouth, so I take off after it. It drops the sack under some trees, runs a bit further, and turns around to watch me. As I stop to grab my food I hear more coyotes from in front of me, close, and to the right. First one was still looking at me. Didn't sleep much that night. I post this story every time this question comes up. I enjoy reliving it as I comment. When I was about 13, my parents and I took a trip to Yellowstone National Park. While hiking a trail we heard a huge crash and a loud scream. "Watch out," were the words yelled out from someone not in sight on the trail ahead. Hundreds of buffalo appeared crashing through the trees coming towards us. Executing our natural flight response to this dismal turn of events, we ran as fast as we could through the woods. I tripped at one point and will remember screaming out to my mother, who was already there to help me out. My father yelled to us to follow him as he started running up the hill on the other side of the path. 5 seconds later we saw the herd of buffalo passing us. Turns out if you are ever being chased by a herd of buffalo you should run uphill because the herd will naturally go downhill. We went to a diner right after that for lunch and I ordered a buffalo burger. Gave me a sense of victory. I haven't had anything too serious, but at a park here in Colorado I once saw a sign that said mountain lions are common here. But don't worry, you won't see them. That unnerved me a bit. Later that night, sitting around the campfire, and suddenly my German Shepherd bolts up and just stares into the darkness. Dude, stop that. It's always scary when you're sitting by the fire minding your own business and then your dog gets up and starts barking into the darkness. I once accidentally peed on a coiled up diamondback rattlesnake while hiking in New Mexico. I once threw a rock at one. Didn't end well. Camping in general can be freaky. Not so much during the day, but when it gets dark. It gets dark. Whenever people say the Blair Witch Project wasn't scary, I always ask them if they've ever been camping. If you have, then that movie probably freaks you the fuck out. Laying in your tent at night not knowing what is 3 feet away from you is terrifying. It's pitch black and quiet, like being alone in a creaky old house except with a x10 multiplier. Every sound could be a bear, wolf, or person out to get you, and if you're in a tent you can't see what's out there. Probably my freakiest experience happened when I was a kid and went camping in Colorado. It was dark but still too early for us to be tired, so we were just sitting around the fire doing the do. Talking, eating s'mores, whatever. I would say we were telling scary stories, but fuck that. We were probably talking about Disney movies or some shit. Now keep in mind how dark it is out there. The light from the fire only goes out so far and it creates like this wall where all light stops. We were sitting there when all of a sudden my sister looked up and saw a pair of eyes looking at us. Me and my sister started freaking out. We were like right on the edge of lose our minds scared. Our parents calmed us down and told us not to move. We had no idea what it was. It was nearly impossible to judge how big it was. So we just sat there and waited for it to go away. Which it did. It was probably a raccoon or some shit, but 6-year-old me was pretty sure it was the chupacabra. Not too interesting of a story, but definitely freaked us out. My dad admits to this day he wasn't scared, but notoriously has never been able to handle scary movies on any level. I call bullshit, Dad. You were scared. I know exactly what you mean about the wall of darkness. Went camping with some friends in the Smoky Mountains as a kid. The mountains are home to black bears, so you have to keep that fact in mind. While sitting around the fire chatting on the first night, we hear something rustling in the leaves just outside of the light. We all go quiet and trying to figure out what the animal was. Then out of the dark walks a skunk. Everyone freezes and looks at each other like WTF? Luckily no one freaked and scared the damn thing. We all stayed where we were, pulled our feet up slowly and just sat as still as possible. He wandered around the campsite and right under our seats looking for dropped scraps of food. When he didn't find anything, he exited back into the darkness on the opposite side of camp. A few minutes later we heard screaming from the other side of the campground, and a short time after that in wafted skunk aroma. Bastard came back every night we were there. I was hiking the Appalachian Trail northbound in early August a few years ago, and I was a day out of Davenport Gap heading to Hot Springs, NC. I don't remember the exact shelter I was at, but I know it was north of Max Patch. That time of year, there aren't many people on the trail, and other than a couple cars at Max Patch, I hadn't seen or spoken to another person in a full day. I decided to end my hike for the day at about 7 p.m. so I could eat dinner and prepare for bed before dark. I was also filming a little diary of my hike as a gift for my sister. I ate, filmed, reloaded on my water, and hit the hay right as it got dark and the crickets came out. At about 2:30 a.m. I was startled awake, but not by a noise, rather the absolute silence around me. I didn't hear the toads, crickets, owls that you'd expect to hear and that I had heard when I had gone to sleep just 6 hours earlier. I looked around, but saw nothing. Everything was perfectly still. I made the decision that I had to get the fuck out of there. I packed all my gear in about 5 minutes, threw on my headlamp, grabbed my bear bag and noped my way up the trail. I'm pretty sure I averaged 4 miles per hour in the pitch black until sunrise. Because of such an early departure, I finished my planned 18 miles into Hot Springs by 10 a.m., which was nice. To this day I have no idea what was there that morning, but I know something was there. I've encountered tons of predators in the woods, from black bears to coyotes, but I've never experienced that calm like that before. Made me think maybe it was some sort of large cat, or worse, some crazy person. Who knows what would have happened had I stayed until sunrise? Maybe nothing, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. This will probably get buried, but 2 years ago, myself and 2 other people were camping in Yellow Bottom, which is in the Cascades of Oregon. About 3 a.m. I woke up hearing what sounded like a bunch of people having a campfire party. Nothing huge, not even scary. Just talking, laughing, stuff like that. I was kind of pissed since we'd specifically come up to get away from the college kids and such. And now somebody had set up camp what sounded like less than 100 yards away. But I couldn't see fire or light through the tent walls. And since that was my big concern, fire in the woods, I just kind of ground my teeth about it and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I wake up again. This time somebody's let a little kid start crying. And it's really annoying. Like, not wailing but just sniffles. That long-term crying that kids do. I listened for about 5 minutes, and since I'm not a monster, I've kind of got this prickly feeling that maybe there's trouble. You know, little kid crying all alone. Where the hell are its parents? Etc. I started to get up and my friend, who I thought was sleeping, grabs my arm, just about giving me a heart attack, and says, "Don't go out there, just wait." He knows the woods better than me, and he sounded actually scared. So I sit and wait, and yeah, a few minutes later, the crying stops and the party starts back up. But the weird this is, I can't really pinpoint now what direction the party is coming from, because I was trying to tell if maybe it was a group who had found the kid and now they were all talking together, but I couldn't tell what direction it was from. The party went on for about another hour, just until dawn. Then all of a sudden, nothing, like, cut off in the middle of a laugh silence. I was completely freaked out by then, and I think I might have made a noise when it just stopped like that. My friend, who hadn't even sat up the entire time, just said "Stick Indians" and then rolled over and fell back asleep. I got up when the sun was finally completely up and made coffee and kind of looked around, but I'm not brave like that and didn't go far. But there was nothing. No campfire. Not tents I could see through the trees. Nothing. We packed up that day and I asked him what a stick Indian was and he wouldn't tell me. Had to come back and Google it. And even now I'm not sure if what's online is true or made up or what. But if you look it up, apparently it's some kind of Yakina forest spirit that lures people out by making noises like crying babies or people having a party and then, I don't know, eats them, or something. So that's my creepy thing in the woods. I don't have any proof, but people who know the Pacific Northwest. It was way up Yellow Bottom, past the official camps, on the left-hand fork of the main road, down that logging road and right by the river, the campsite with the huge fallen over dead trees. That one. Me. I've never been back up there. No sir. I'm not sure this counts since we were in a cabin and not camping, but on a trip up to the mountains when I was about 12, a bear totally walked into our cabin. As someone who is terrified of bears, that was really fucking scary. I was hunting a big field for whitetail. It was public land and I decided not to set up a tree stand and just sit behind some heavy cover on the ground. I try to get to my spots well before sunup so I'm not making noise at first light, when many deer start to move. I got to my spot at about 5 a.m. It was absolutely pitch black and all I had was my headlamp. After I switched off my headlamp, it was quiet for about 30 seconds when suddenly I heard a howl from my right side. It was clear the howl came from the edge of the field I was in, roughly 200 yards away. It sent shivers down my spine. About 30 seconds passed when I heard a second howl in the opposite direction, on the other end of the field, probably 200 yards the other way. At this point I'm pretty freaked out, but I figure it's highly unlikely anything would attack me. Not much longer and from directly behind me, somewhere in the thick of the woods, a third howl. I now feel surrounded, and I'm terrified. My truck was about 500 yards away to my left, along the edge of the woods in the field and down a narrow path that cuts right through the woods. I flicked on my headlamp, took the safety off my gun, equipped my hunting knife and got the fuck out as fast as I could. I waited until the sun came up before I went back and actually hunted. I never saw a deer that entire weekend. I presume whatever was howling drove the deer out, and I don't blame the deer one bit. The entire experience was very scary, and I've done a lot of hunting, camping, etc. I've spent a ton of time in the woods both during the day and night, and nothing has ever freaked me out so bad. Edit, I do believe it was wolf, not coyotes. The area doesn't hold a lot of wolves, but it is known to have some. I know the difference between a wolf and coyote howl. I'll just admit I was so freaked out maybe I thought it sounded like wolves and convinced myself of it. Oh, I have so many of these. I'm expecting a bunch of bear and wolf stories in this thread, so how about a moose story? So there's this island in Lake Superior called Al Royale. This island really cool because it is full of wolves and moose that supposedly walked to it when Lake Superior was frozen over a long time ago. But there are no bears, so when you go there your bear protection can be fairly lax. For our group, that meant we could hike in relative quiet without fear of surprising a bear. So along the entire length of the island is this big ridge line, and it was awesome hiking. One day as we were walking along this ridge we hear some rustling to our right, at the base of the ridge, and when we look to see what it was we see two baby moose, but no mama moose. Now this is true of just about every animal I have ever encountered, but moose are very protective of their young, so seeing these baby moose, but not their mom was pretty strange. But as we are watching the baby moose do their thing, we hear huffing from the other side of the ridge. Turning around we see the mama moose on the other side of the ridge, so we are at the top of this ridge standing directly between the mama moose and her babies. And the mama moose is just staring at us. Now this part of the ridge was fairly rocky, so to keep walking we would have needed to start walking directly toward the baby moose. Clearly this wasn't the option to take. Instead, all we could do was sit down on the top of the ridge and wait and hope the moose would leave soon. So we sit down, hoping to get low enough that the mama moose can't see us over the ridge line. And we wait, listening to the mama moose and her babies on either side of us. Eventually we couldn't hear them anymore, so we assume they left. And we get up and keep walking, and we don't see them again. But for the rest of the trip we were constantly looking around to stay out of the way of any more moose. First backpacking trip without my parents. I was 11, had just started Scouts, had read the book front to back repeatedly. I was armed with all the knowledge. Bear bags, snake bites, fish hook removal. I was ready. Long day of backpacking. Got to the campsite, did normal Scout things, went to bed. I was bushed, woke up early in the morning. It was still dark, and I heard a bear snarl. Froze in my sleeping bag. Bear snarled again. I did not move. Was planning on how I was going to get to my pocket knife if it attacked through the tent. I knew there was no food or toothpaste in my gear. I'd put it all up in the bear bag like a good Scout. But my tent compatriot must have not been such a sterling example of an outdoorsman as I. And now we were doomed to death by mauling. That bear snarled around for ages. I didn't move a bit. I barely breathed. The sun started to come up. The bear was still snarling around. And then my Scoutmaster woke up and stopped snoring. This happened after my hunt for some whitetail in northern Michigan. I was leaving the woods and heading for my car for the long ride home. The sun was setting and the air was crisp. The smell of fall in the air. As I got to my car, I heard some rustling in the brush on the other side of the trail I was parked on. Thinking it was an animal, I looked across and saw a guy standing there. He was slightly swaying from side to side. Not a drunk sway, but more of an impatient standing in line for a long time type of sway. I said, "Hey man, you lost?" He didn't answer, but he gave the creepiest smirk and tilted his head back slightly without taking his eyes off of me. Needless to say, I was creeped the fuck out. My guns made me feel protected, but as I loaded my pack and my shotgun in the car, I didn't take my eyes off of him, and he kept his locked on mine. I kept my 9mm on me in case he tried something. I was parked parallel to the trail, so when I got in the car, I could still see him. I drove and checked my mirror. He was in the middle of the trail just walking in my direction. That was the creepiest day hunting I have ever had. I went backpacking for the first time, and for the first time, I had to ask for the trowel. You know, the little shovel you use to dig a hole for you to poop in. I was pretty mortified about this already, so I set out from the camp heading away from the trail we entered our campsite through. I hiked about 10 minutes in the twilight and found a nice place halfway down a hillside that had no brush. I dug my little hole, got my paper ready, and got about the business of going about my business. As I was pooping, I peered into the twilight. I saw a strange pattern to the landscape before me. I realized it was a trail, just as a troop of teenaged girls appeared over the next ridge. It was about 200 meters from where I was squatting. This was 24 years ago, and I can still hear the screams. When I was 21, I took a trip to California with my best friend. One of the days we decided to spend at Muir Woods. When we went in, the lady at the front desk asked us if we wanted to also buy a map while we paid our entrance fee. We politely declined and then snickered to each other immediately after that we didn't need a map, and that's how they suck more money out of tourists. Also, we didn't bring food or water because we only wanted to hike for 2 to 3 hours. So of course we get lost. And I mean really lost. We were very deep in the trails to the point where we hadn't seen another hiker for hours. Which says something because this place was super crowded and the entrance trails were cluttered with people. Anyways, we are starting to panic because we were very thirsty and hungry. I remember peeing and it being neon yellow because I was so dehydrated, and the sun was starting to set. We were discussing spending the night in these woods and what we would do about eating/drinking/exposure. Anyways, we got onto a trail that we recognized just as the sun set and walked back on this trail in the pitch black for about 45 minutes. It was crazy to get back to the once packed parking lot and see our car be the only one. I'm sure people will have more extreme stories, but this was really scary for me and my friend. I was bushwhacking through a forest and encountered a porcupine. As I receded from the porcupine, there were 2 opossums that started hissing at me. I was surrounded. I picked up a stick and shoved one of the possums out of the way as it clamped down on the stick. I consider myself lucky. Alright, so my dad and I had been hiking out in Colorado, and on this day we were doing the Shavano-Tabaguachi Pear, which to anyone accustomed to climbing 14ers knows isn't very difficult, just a fun day hike. As the sun came up, we noticed it was completely cloud covered, but figured they'd all burn off in a few hours. As the day goes on, we summit both peaks and are coming back to Shavano completely engulfed in the sheet of clouds. Visibility was a good 10 feet max. Now I say the difficulty isn't bad, but as we are making our way down Shavano back to tree line, we end up coming down the opposite side of the mountain. Now we make it down about 2,000 feet before we finally notice something's wrong. Just then, the clouds decided it was time to start pouring on us, with the fog only getting worse. As we come down further, the incline starts getting relatively steep, and we decide the best move is turn around and go back up to the saddle and cross back into the valley we came up on. Very stupid decision. We make it about 1,000 feet back up and we still can't see the top anywhere in sight, and the several ton boulders we've been climbing up are hella slick and are starting to shift with all the rain still pouring. I finally decide it's time to try and call S&R. After spending 30 minutes trying to get a signal, we managed to get a hold of them, and they say all we can do is go all the way down this valley and hike through the woods for several miles until well run into the Colorado Trail. They had no way of reaching us. At this point I tell my dad, at least there's no lightning, and just like that a few hundred feet away strikes the first bolt, and from then on we were in a full-on thunderstorm. 500 feet above tree line on the side of a mountain. So then we freak the fuck out and start running down the mountain, not caring about falling or slipping. We managed to make it down to Shavano Lake without anything more than a few scrapes and bruises, and we think hell yeah we did. Now just a quick walk in the woods back to camp. And I'm not gonna go much more into detail, but that woods walk ended up being another 5 hours in the pouring near freezing rain. I will never forget how good the shower felt that night. Edit, sorry about the shitty formatting and grammar, you just gotta roll with it.